Hey gang, so here we are again, snow day number, I've lost count. So, you were supposed to read chapter 12 last night, or finish it last night if you got started on it in class. I'm not sure what went on in each of your classes. Some of my classes got further into it than others. Hopefully from chapter 12 you got a little bit of an experience of what it was like for the Finch children to go to Calpurnia's church. And they saw some differences in the way they worship and the way Calpurnia worships in an African American church, but they also saw some similarities. One of the main differences they saw was how they sang hymns. The church they attended had hymnals. The church Calpurnia attended did not have hymnals, couldn't afford it, and Calpurnia even made the point it wouldn't matter if we had them or not, because the majority of the people in the African American church couldn't read. They didn't go to school, so they couldn't read. Now Calpurnia could read, and she told Scout that she learned to read growing up out at the landing between the Buford farm and Finch's Landing. She was taught to read out there. So she obviously has been educated, and she taught her son, Zebo, to read as well, and he's the guy who kind of leads the music. They call it lining in the African American church, where he would say a line and then everyone would sing a line. So that's kind of what that was going on in chapter 12 as well. At the end of chapter 12, we do find that Aunt Alexandra shows up on the porch, and we'll see why she's there. But the kids are a little shocked that she's sitting on the front porch when they come home from church with Calpurnia. Another thing that happened at Calpurnia's church was when Reverend Sykes basically said, "Shut the doors. We're not leaving here until we take up at least $10 to help Helen Robinson." Helen is Tom's wife, and Tom is the black man that Atticus is defending. And because of the charge against Tom Robinson, which was also mentioned in the chapter, a lot of people won't hire Helen to work. And so she doesn't have any work right now, but they have several children. So her church is taking up an offering of at least $10 to try to help her out. And Reverend Sykes basically said, "Close the back doors, we're not leaving until we get $10. And they did, and they got the $10. But chapter 12 is a great chapter, so make sure you get that read. That was your homework for last night, to do 12 and answer the questions. I believe everybody got this sheet yesterday in class. So also be working on your part 1 take-home test. You can use your book and your notes for that. Also, there are some things in this test about sentence types: simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. I'm going to try to put a PowerPoint attached to the email and on my SharePoint that reviews those sentence types, in case you need to look back over that before you answer these last few questions on there. But that's due tomorrow. It was due today, but obviously we're not at school today, so it's due tomorrow. My gut tells me we'll be at school tomorrow, but if we're not there tomorrow, it's due the day we come back. But make sure you have that filled out and completed. Email me if you've got any questions about it, if there's a question you don't understand. Also, you got your new vocabulary, which is literary terms. Make sure you're working on the back sheet. It's due March the 4th. So make sure you're working on that as well. And then you should have your chapter questions that you were given yesterday in class. All right, so I need to speed this up because Mackenzie Erie wants me to do it faster than I've been doing it. So, okay, here we go, Mackenzie. Chapter 13. "Put my bag in the front bedroom, Calpurnia," was the first thing Aunt Alexandra said. "Jean Louise, stop scratching your head," was the second thing she said. Calpurnia picked up Auntie's heavy suitcase and opened the door. "I'll take it," said Jim, and took it. I heard the suitcase hit the bedroom floor with a thump. The sound had a dull permanence about it. "Have you come for a visit, Auntie?" I asked. Aunt Alexandra's visits from the landing were rare, and she traveled in state. She owned a bright green square Buick and a black chauffeur, so she had an African-American driver for her car. Both kept in an unhealthy state of tidiness, but today they were nowhere to be seen. "Didn't your father tell you?" she asked. Jim and I shook our heads. "Probably he forgot. He's not in yet, is he?" "No, he doesn't usually get back until late afternoon," said Jim. "Well, your father and I decided it was time that I came to stay with you for a while." Now, for a while, in Macomb meant anything from 3 days to 30 years. Jim and I exchanged glances. "Jim's growing up now, and you are too," she said to me. "We decided that it would be best for you to have some feminine influence. It won't be many years, Jean Louise, before you become interested in clothes and boys." I could have made several answers to this. Cal's a girl. It would be many years before I'd be interested in boys. I would never be interested in clothes, but I kept quiet. "Well, what about Uncle Jimmy?" asked Jim. "Is he coming too?" "Oh, no, he's staying at the Landing. He'll keep the place going." Well, the moment I said, "Won't you miss him?" I realized that this was not a tactful question. Uncle Jimmy present or Uncle Jimmy absent made not much difference. He never said anything. Aunt Alexandra ignored my question. I could think of nothing else to say to her. In fact, I could never think of anything to say to her, and I sat thinking of past painful conversations between us. "How are you doing, Jean Louise?" "Fine, thank you, ma'am. How are you?" "Well, very well, thank you." "What have you been doing with yourself?" "Nothing." "Well, don't you do anything?" "No." Certainly have friends." "Yes'm." "Well, what do you all do?" "Nothing." It was plain that Auntie thought me dull in the extreme, because I once heard her tell Atticus that I was sluggish. There was a story behind all this, but I had no desire to extract it from her then. Today was Sunday, and Aunt Alexandra was positively irritable on the Lord's Day. I guess it was her Sunday corset. She was not fat, but solid, and she chose protective garments that drew up her bosom to giddy heights, pinched in her waist, flared out her rear, and managed to suggest that Aunt Alexandra's was once an hourglass figure. From any angle, it was formidable. The remainder of the afternoon went by in a gentle gloom that descends when relatives appear, but was dispelled when we heard a car turn in the driveway. It was Atticus, home from Montgomery. Jim, forgetting his dignity, ran with me to meet him. Jim seized his briefcase and bag. I jumped into his arms, felt his vague, dry kiss, and said, "Did you bring me a book? Do you know Auntie's here?" Atticus answered both questions in the affirmative. "How'd you like for her to come and live with us?" I said, "I would like it very much," which was a lie. But one must lie under certain circumstances, and at all times when one can't do anything about them. "We felt it was time you children needed." "Well, it's like this, Scout," Atticus said. "Your aunt's doing me a favor as well as you all. I can't stay here all day with you, and the summer's going to be a hot one." Now, I think he's not only talking about the heat of summer, I think he's also talking about the trial. It's going to be a hot one. "Yes, sir," I said, not understanding a word he said. I had an idea, however, that Aunt Alexandra's appearance on the scene was not so much Atticus's doing as hers. Auntie had a way of declaring what is best for the family, and I suppose her coming to live with us was in that category. Macomb welcomed her. Miss Maudie Atkinson baked a lane cake, so loaded with shinny's alcohol, it made me tight. Miss Stephanie Crawford had long visits with Aunt Alexandra, consisting mostly of Miss Stephanie shaking her head and saying, Miss Rachel next door had Auntie over for coffee in the afternoons, and Mr. Nathan Radley went so far as to come up in the front yard and say he was glad to see her. When she settled in with us and life resumed its daily pace, Aunt Alexandra seemed as if she had always lived with us. Her missionary society refreshments added to her reputation as a hostess. She did not permit Calpurnia to make the delicacies required to sustain the society through long reports on Rice Christians. She joined and became secretary of the Macomb Amanuensis Club. To all parties present and participating in the life of the county, Aunt Alexandra was one of the last of her kind. She had riverboat boarding school manners. Let any moral come along and she would uphold it. She was born in the objective case. She was an incurable gossip. When Aunt Alexandra went to school, self-doubt could not be found in any textbook. She knew not its meaning. She was never bored, and given the slightest chance, she would exercise her royal prerogative. She would arrange, advise, caution, and warn. She never let a chance escape her to point out the shortcomings of other tribal groups to the greater glory of our own, a habit that amused Jim rather than annoyed him. Auntie better watch how she talks. Scratch most folks and make 'em, and they're kin to us. So Jim said she likes to talk about people, but she better be careful because in Macomb, a lot of people are kin to each other. So she might be talking to somebody's relative. Aunt Alexandra, in underlining the moral of a young Sam Merriweather's suicide, said it was caused by a morbid streak in his family. Let a 16-year-old girl giggle in the choir, and Auntie would say, it just goes to show you, all the Penfold women are flighty. Everybody in Macomb, it seemed, had a streak. A drinking streak, a gambling streak, a mean streak, a funny streak. Once when Auntie assured us that Miss Stephanie Crawford's tendency to mind other people's business was hereditary, Atticus said, well, sister, when you stop to think about it, our generation's practically the first in the Finch family not to marry its cousins. Would you say the Finches have an incestuous streak? Auntie said, no, that's where we got our small hands and feet. I never understood her preoccupation with heredity. Somewhere I'd received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with the sense they had. But Aunt Alexandra was of the opinion, obliquely expressed, that the longer a family had been squatting on one patch of land, the finer it was. So I want you to get this. Scout says that fine folks are people who did the best they could with the sense they had. That's probably because that's the way her dad has brought her up. But Aunt Alexandra thinks the fine families are the ones who've owned land the longest, the landowners. Well, that makes the Yules fine folks then, said Jim. The tribe of which Burris Yule and his brethren consisted had lived on the same plot of earth behind the Macomb dump, and had thrived on county welfare money for 3 generations. Aunt Alexandra's theory had something behind it, though. Macomb was an ancient town. It was 20 miles east of Finch's Landing, awkwardly inland for such an old town. But Macomb would have been closer to the river had it not been for the nimble-wittedness of one Sinkfield. The guy's name was Sinkfield, who in the dawn of history, so way back, operated an inn where 2 pig trails met, the only tavern in the territory. Sinkfield, no patriot, served and supplied ammunition to the Indians and the settlers alike, neither knowing or caring whether he was a part of the Alabama Territory or the Creek Nation, so long as business was good. Business was excellent when Governor William Wyatt Bibb, with a view to promoting the newly created county's domestic tranquility, now that's an illusion, it's an historical illusion, I'll let you figure out where it came from, dispatched a team of surveyors to locate its exact center and there established its seat of government. The surveyors, Sinkfield's guests, told their host that he was in the territorial confines of Macomb County and showed him the probable spot where the county seat would be built. Had not Sinkfield made a bold stroke to preserve his holdings, Macomb would have sat in the middle of Winston Swamp. So Sinkfield looks at the map where they say Macomb's going to be and he says, that's a swamp. We don't want to be there. A place totally devoid of interest. Instead, Macomb grew and sprawled out from its hub, Sinkfield's Tavern, because, get this, Sinkfield reduced his guests to myopic drunkenness one evening. So he gave them a lot of liquor and they got drunk. Induced them to bring forward their maps and charts. So he's looking at their maps and charts. He lopped off a little here, added a bit there, and adjusted the center of the county to meet his requirements. He sent them packing the next day, armed with their charts and 5 quarts of shinny in their saddlebags. So he gave them more alcohol, 2 apiece and 1 for the governor. Because its primary reason for existence was government, Macomb was spared the grubbiness that distinguished most Alabama towns its size. In the beginning, its buildings were solid, its courthouse proud, its streets graciously wide. Macomb's proportion of professional people ran high. One went there to have his teeth pulled, his wagon fixed, his heart listened to, his money deposited, his soul saved, his mules vetted. But the ultimate wisdom of Sinkfield's maneuver is open to question. He placed the young town too far away from the only kind of public transportation in those days, riverboat. And it took a man from the north end of the county 2 days to travel to Macomb for store-bought goods. As a result, the town remained the same size for 100 years, an island in a patchwork sea of cotton fields and timberland. Although Macomb was ignored during the war between the states, Reconstruction rule and economic ruin forced the town to grow. It grew inward. New people so rarely settled there. The same families married the same families until the members of the community looked faintly alike. Occasionally, someone would return from Montgomery or Mobile with an outsider, but the result caused only a ripple in the quiet stream of family resemblance. Things were more or less the same during my early years. Now, there was indeed a caste system in Macomb, but to my mind it worked this way. You've got the older citizens, and then the present generation of people who'd lived side by side for years and years, and they were utterly predictable to one another. They took for granted attitudes, character shadings, even gestures, as having been repeated in each generation and refined by time. Thus the dicta, "Oh, no Crawford minds his own business," and "every third Meriwether is morbid." The truth is not in the Delafields. All the Bufords walk like that. We're simply guides to daily living. Never take a check from a Delafield without a discreet call to the bank. Miss Maudie Atkinson's shoulder stoops because she was a Buford. If Miss Grace Meriwether sips gin out of Lydia E. Pinkham's bottles, it's nothing unusual. Her mother did the same. So all that's to say, you can see hereditary features being passed down through generations. Aunt Alexandra fitted into the world of Macomb like a hand into a glove, but never into the world of Jim and me. I so often wondered how she could be Atticus's and Uncle Jack's sister that I revived half-remembered tales of changelings and mandrake roots that Jim had spun long ago. These were abstract speculations for the first month of her stay, as she had little to say to Jim or me, and we saw her only at mealtimes and at night before we went to bed. It was summer, and we were outdoors. Of course, some afternoons when we would run inside for a drink of water, I would find the living room overrun with Macomb ladies, sipping and whispering, fanning, and I would be called, "Jean Louise, come and speak to these ladies." When I appeared in the doorway, Auntie would look as if she regretted her request. I was usually mud-splashed or covered with sand. "Speak to your cousin Lily," she said one afternoon when she had trapped me in the hall. "Who?" I said. "Your cousin Lilybrook," said Aunt Alexandra. "She our cousin? I didn't know that." Aunt Alexandra managed to smile in a way that conveyed a gentle apology to Cousin Lily and firm disapproval to me. When Cousin Lilybrook left, I knew I was in for it. It was a sad thing that my father had neglected to tell me about the Finch family or to install any pride into his children. She summoned Jim, who sat warily on the sofa beside me. She left the room and returned with a purple-covered book on which Meditations of Joshua St. Clair was stamped in gold. "Your cousin wrote this," said Aunt Alexandra. "He was a beautiful character." Jim examined the small volume. "Is this the cousin Joshua who was locked up for so long?" Aunt Alexandra said. "How do you know that?" "Why, Atticus said he went round the bend at the university. Said he tried to shoot the president. Said cousin Joshua said he wasn't anything but a sewer inspector and tried to shoot him with an old flintlock pistol, only it just blew up in his hand. Atticus said it cost the family $500 to get him out of that one." Aunt Alexandra was standing stiff as a stork. "That's all," she said. "We'll see about this." Before bedtime, I was in Jim's room trying to borrow a book when Atticus knocked and entered. He sat on the side of Jim's bed, looked at us soberly, and then he grinned. He said. He was beginning to preface some things he said with a throaty noise, and I thought he must at last be getting old, but he looked the same. I don't know exactly how to say this," he began. "Well, just say it," said Jim. "Have we done something?" Our father was actually fidgeting. "No, I just want to explain to you that your Aunt Alexandra asked me, well, son, you know you're a Finch, don't you?" That's what I've been told. Jim looked out of the corners of his eyes. His voice rose uncontrollably. Atticus, what's the matter? Atticus crossed his knees and folded his arms. I'm trying to tell you the facts of life. Jim's disgust deepened. I know all that stuff, he said. Atticus suddenly grew serious. In his lawyer's voice, without a shade of inflection, he said, Your aunt has asked me to try and impress upon you and Jean Louise that you are not from run-of-the-mill people, that you are the product of several generations' gentle breeding. Atticus paused, watching me locate an elusive red bug on my leg. Gentle breeding, he continued, when I'd found it and scratched it, and that you should try to live up to your name. Atticus persevered in spite of us. She asked me to tell you that you must try to behave like the little lady and gentleman that you are. She wants to talk to you about the family and what it's meant to Macomb County through the years, so you'll have some idea of who you are, so you might be moved to behave accordingly, he concluded at a gallop. Stunned, Jim and I looked at each other, then at Atticus, whose collar seemed to worry him. We did not speak to him. Presently, I picked up a comb from Jim's dresser and ran its teeth along the edge. Stop that noise, Atticus said. His curtness stung me. The comb was midway in its journey and I banged it down. For no reason, I felt myself beginning to cry, but I could not stop. This was not my father. My father never thought these thoughts. My father never spoke so. Aunt Alexandra had put him up to this somehow. Through my tears, I saw Jim standing in a similar pool of isolation, his head cocked to one side. There was nowhere to go, but I turned to go and met Atticus's vest front. I buried my head in it and listened to the small internal noises that went on behind the light blue cloth. His watch ticking, the faint crackle of his starched shirt, the soft sound of his breathing. Your stomach's growling, I said. I know it, he said. You better take some soda. I will, he said. Atticus, is all this behaving and stuff going to make things different? I mean, are you? And I felt his hand on the back of my head. Don't you worry about anything, he said. It's not time to worry. When I heard that, I knew he'd come back to us. The blood in my legs began to flow again, and I raised my head. You really want us to do all that? I can't remember everything finches are supposed to do. I don't want you to remember it. Forget it. He went to the door and out of the room. Shutting the door behind him, he nearly slammed it, but caught himself at the last minute and closed it softly. As Jim and I stared, the door opened again and Atticus peered around. His eyebrows were raised. His glasses had slipped. Get more like Cousin Joshua every day, don't I? Do you think I'll end up costing the family $500? I know what he was trying to do. But Atticus was only a man. It takes a woman to do that kind of work. All right, that's the end of chapter 13. It's kind of a short chapter. Get your chapter questions out. Some people get confused about that last part. It takes a woman to do that kind of work. I think Jim and Scout is saying, I think Atticus was trying to teach us about manners and our family history, and he was trying to do it. He didn't do it very well, but I think Scout's saying, but sometimes it takes a woman to do that. All right, get your chapter questions answered, and probably we'll see you tomorrow at school. I will try to record chapter 14 for you as well. Bye.